So we're starting Unit 2, and this unit is on all about sketching and technical drawing and all kinds of stuff involving making even better three-dimensional looking sketches. So we're going to start off with some rules. That's what the word conventions in this case means, rules for sketching. So line conventions, line rules. You should have a worksheet or their note thing that you're going to use. It looks something like, let's see if I can indicate this here, in this web screen area thing here. It's my webcam, for example, here. Look, there's my hand. See, right there. So you should have this right here in your possession. That's what you're going to use to take notes on. And then what you can do is cut this section out right here. Alright, cut the section that you see here inside the box out and put it into your notebook after you write down the various things. For example, let's see. For example, he says, there we go, different ways to describe different things using different thicknesses of lines, or whether they're dashed, or what, all kinds of different rules here. Not every one of them is going to be something we use this unit, but we will use them eventually in this course. Some are more important right now than others. So let's start with construction lines. So as we're laying out our drawing, there will be times where we draw lines that we need in order to figure out what's going on, but they're not actually lines that are on the drawing. For example, these lines here. All right, if you're looking at the webcam part. So these are construction lines. Notice they're very light. All right, these construction lines here are very light compared to the other ones. The other ones, these darker lines here, are called object lines. And the darkest lines are your outline of your object that you see right there. Notice these are the construction lines in here. They're lighter. They were used in the beginning to kind of figure out where everything was going to go. But then once you start getting a feel for your object and so forth, you're going to really darken those lines in. And they're called object lines. So what you would do right now in your notes, by the way, is draw the little arrow there, say these are construction lines. All right, so you're going through and you're annotating, remember the word annotate, your paper using the information that I'm giving you through the presentation here. So, for example, these would be object lines, and so on and so forth. From here on out, I'm not going to sit here and write them for you so that you know what to write. It will be fairly obvious from the presentation what you need to write. Hidden lines. So hidden lines, let's zoom this in a little bit. So hidden lines are these dotted lines that represent, in this case, a hole that is present, and it's over here as well, but there's a reason they're not dotted right here. In fact, let me get an arrow to point with here. Let's see. I need this guy. 1 second. There we go. So notice that here they're dotted and here they're not. Don't panic. This is what they call a cutaway section. So they've cut away an imaginary section of it so you can actually see the hole that goes right through this piece. Here's you can't see it, but that hole is there. That's what they use this dotted line for. This dotted line is something a little bit different. This is a hidden line, and so is this. So you would mark that on your drawing, right? See, right over here in your drawing, right? So that you know what's going on. Center lines. So center lines are there to show us the center of objects. So for example here, the center of that hole that goes through is represented, hold on, let me do this. So the center of this hole that bores through this piece is right along there. So that represents where the center of that hole would be. So anything that's symmetrical, oftentimes circles and so forth, we will end up using center lines. And we don't make them as thick as an object line. They're about half as thick. Hidden lines, let's see, what do they say about those? What's their thickness? Do they say? Not really. So we're going to assume that they're reasonably thick. Center lines are definitely only half as thick. Now, section lines. So in this particular piece, they've cut away this piece. They've ripped an imaginary section out, and when they do that, you draw these diagonal lines to show that you've cut into the object. We've cut so far that we're at the point where we've cut so you can see the actual hole, or at least half of the hole, that goes through this part. And so these diagonal lines represent a section, a cutaway. So give you, and by the way, you can pause the video anytime to jot this down. You do not have to try to keep up. You obviously have control over me in this sense, so you can pause it and jot a few things down, like what a section line is and so forth. So where we show that cutaway, we do a squiggly line, called a short break line. Let me make that a little bigger so you can see what we're looking at here. There you go. So this right in here shows like an imaginary, like you ripped off a piece, and this would be like the jagged edge. That's not a bad way to imagine it. And so that's called a short break line. All right, these are important lines, dimension lines. So we're going to get into this as the course goes on, both with a computer program and doing it by hand. So one of the things I want to really point out here is with these dimension lines is that there are two arrows on either side, and in between those arrows is generally written the actual size of the part. All right, so these are our dimension lines, right here, 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 and here. Now, to show where those dimension lines are supposed to be pointing to, we will extend lines. So we want to show that this distance is from here to here, in fact here. So if we want to show that this 1.25 inches, two little slashes for inches, is from here to here, we draw what's called extension lines. These two lines here and this one here. This is important. Notice there's a gap there. Do not draw them all the way up to the object, because then it gets confusing as to what's a dimension and what's part of the object. So they say 1/16 of an inch away. Just leave a gap for now. You don't have to go measuring 1/16 of an inch, but leave a little bit of a gap. Notice there's a gap here as well. All right, here's an extension line, goes all the way down to here, so we can show this dimension right here. Might not use this one too much early on here, but if a part has a long section that we don't need to draw, so there's a big gap between this piece and this one, and it's a very similar, and to compact it, we might use these jagged lines to show that we're jumping a bit. Not a huge thing, but we'll write it down so we know what it is at least. A long break line. Leader lines. Now they will be important as we go through. You'll use those a decent amount. When you need to show how big this circle is, the radius of the circle, for example, we use something called a leader line. So it's sort of like a dimension line, except it's a single arrow. Usually we write the dimension here. So for example, this circle here has I believe this is a diameter. That line all the way through, I believe, is a diameter. I should know that. I'm going to double check myself later on. But let's say this has a diameter of 2 inches. In other words, a distance from here all the way across, or from here all the way across through the middle. And to show that, we write that, and we draw a little bit of a horizontal section, and then an angle and an arrow pointing to that particular circle. And so this tells us the information about that circle. Likewise for these others. These are called leader lines. Once again, you're marking all this on your page over here, right? You're not waiting for me to do it because you can clearly see what needs to be labeled. So what we've talked about, they generally are very important in terms of technical drawing. So technical drawing, usually that's these days is CAD and other computer programs. When I was in school, I learned how to do it by hand using very T-squares and rulers and all that other stuff. But even when we're sketching now, we're going to expect these line conventions to be followed. So one of the things I'm grading is whether or not your construction lines they should be less dense than your object lines. Hidden lines should be dashed, and so forth and so on. So we'll be expecting that as we go through. Precedence of lines, so sometimes things get complex, and different lines may, like I say here, overlap each other. So which ones rule? Generally, object lines will take precedence over hidden and center lines. That makes sense. Hidden lines take precedence over center lines. Once again, it's more important to know where the actual thing is more than it is its center. So if you had an overlap of the two from two different parts of the drawing, you would go with the hidden. The hidden lines, not the center. And something called cutting plane lines take precedence over all others. We'll get to that later on. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I don't even think on your handout there's an example of what a cutting plane line looks like. So, for example, they show different places here where there might be a hidden line behind this, but if it's part of an object as well, it takes precedence, and so forth. In this whole presentation, the things I'm most interested in are some of the previous things, knowing what the lines are and how dark they should be, and so forth. All right, so we're now kind of ready to start practicing and learning some different sketching techniques, and that's what the next video is going to show.